Every day of Friday, my latest novel, excites me. How to be joyful every day of the week. In 2020, Joel Osteen's empire was valued at $110 million. Then something occurred that completely altered the situation. According to insiders, he lost $60 million in just 5 years by 2025. He put his enormous mansion up for sale. His private jet vanished. Quiet layoffs began to occur at Lakewood Church. Here's the startling bit, though. Joel no longer makes money by preaching. His church would never anticipate it. The man who taught millions about success is now in dire straits, and you will be astounded by his hidden source of income. Joel Osteen was born in Houston, Texas, on March 5, 1963. Raised in a home where the walls resounded with preaching, prayer, and camera wires, he was the youngest of 6 children. John Osteen, his father, was a Southern Baptist pastor before quitting the church to found his own. John built the first Lakewood church in 1959, before Joel was even born, out of an old feed shop on the outskirts of Houston. Even though it was little, 90 individuals showed up on the first day. That tiny gathering turned into the beginning of something enormous. John had an unconventional style. He introduced faith healing, speaking in tongues, and charismatic preaching. Despite being outside of Baptist customs, these actions stirred people, and the church continued to expand. Joel observed this development from the front row as a lad, taking in the energy of change and the rhythm of faith that seemed to flow with every service, rather than as a preacher's kid who just dragged along. In 1981, that rhythm was upset. Joel's mother, Joel Osteen, was diagnosed with metastatic liver cancer when he was 18. It was too far along to be treated. With no other choices, the doctors sent her home. The house's atmosphere shifted. Joel saw his father convert their living room into a prayer room and assemble their close friends and relatives. Dodie declared on December 11, 1981, that she will persevere because of her religion. Despite being weak and fading, her body managed to rebound. The doctors were unable to explain how she recovered from that illness. She continued to live. She even authored the book Healed of Cancer, which was distributed around the congregation as a testimonies piece. Joel assisted in making copies of those tapes. He observed how that one moment unfolded. For the family and the church, a single proclamation of healing served as a spiritual cornerstone. Joel's ideas on miracles, hope, and the power of words when expressed with conviction would all be influenced by that story. However, Joel's early years weren't entirely filled with miracles and microphones. He attended a modest high school and led a very typical adolescent life. Friends, sports, and light-hearted pastimes. He disliked speaking in front of an audience. He had no desire to preach. He was fond of photography. He enjoyed editing. He enjoyed the subdued power of narrating from behind the camera. Joel spent the 1970s learning how to run equipment while Lakewood expanded from 90 members to over 1,000. He assisted his father in starting a weekly television show, which gradually grew to broadcast in 100 countries. This wasn't a pastime. Joel was creating something that would go beyond any lecture inside 4 walls by molding the church's identity on television. Nevertheless, people anticipated that he would eventually preach. He stayed away from it. No one called him. Not quite yet. The tale of his father lingered in the background. In 1927, John Osteen was born. He had served as a Baptist pastor before experiencing a spiritual awakening that caused him to drift away. Lakewood was inspired by that moment. Although it began in the feed store, the church had grown to over 1,000 members by 1960. They continued to expand. People were drawn to John's blend of prosperity themes and healing messages, and his TV broadcasts gained popularity. He spoke of faith as having the power to lift people out of poverty, cure cancer, and create entire worlds. But there was pressure attached to all of it. Joel, who was still a child, witnessed his father struggling to strike a balance between family and leadership following sermons. It seemed as though the house was an extension of the pulpit. Discussions over the ministry even permeated dinner talks. Then their story's secret came to light. John had been married previously before Dodie. In the early 1950s, his first marriage to Emma Jean Schaefer terminated in divorce. Almost nobody discussed it. The church didn't broadcast about it. They buried it deep because a preacher with a divorce didn't look good in the 1950s. Joel was raised in a house that was influenced by quiet in certain areas but was based on faith. He learnt about the distinction between what people perceive and what they conceal from that silence. Later on, it would affect his demeanor. He would constantly be cheerful and light, with little to no bloom showing through. Early on, the family's finances were precarious. It was a modest home. Joel saw his father write 45 books in all. The majority were self-published. Despite their initial poor sales, these books helped spread John's message widely. Even as a teenager, Joel was already assisting and overseeing the expanding media presence. He was essentially in charge of Lakewood's television division by the time he was 19. He didn't have a theological degree or experience preaching, but he was skilled at timing sermon breaks, editing clips, framing shots, and tracking his father's attire on yellow legal pads to prevent visual repetitions. He was constructing something from a soundboard rather than a pulpit. After completing his high school education in 1981, he enrolled in Tulsa's Oral Roberts University. He decided against theology in favor of radio and television communications. He was there for a year. He didn't feel comfortable in the rigidly religious setting. He preferred experiential learning above textbook arguments and chapel lectures. He then departed. In 1982, he returned to Houston and put himself back into the media department of Lakewood. He was still to preach, according to his father. Joel continued to object. His main goal was to construct the first professional TV studio in Lakewood. The budget was modest. It was used equipment. He gained all of his knowledge via doing. Joel was in the control room fine-tuning every camera angle, adjusting lights, editing tapes, and making sure his father's remarks were clear, crisp, and broadcast-ready while the congregation only saw the finished broadcast. Through his efforts, Lakewood's weekly attendance increased to 6,600 by 1984. The church's television presence took off. Preaching about prosperity combined with contemporary imagery. Joel remained in the background, allowing his father and others to take center stage. At this point, he began dating Victoria. She was someone he could confide in and open himself to. He informed her that his role was behind the scenes and that he didn't want to preach. She supported him while he continued to construct Lakewood's technical foundation after they were married in 1987. Joel's siblings were going in various directions. Paul went to Africa as a medical missionary. He co-wrote novels with Lisa. They frequently had heated dinner discussions on expectations, leadership, and faith. Joel was usually silent. He didn't require attention. He worked in the editing room, on the wires, and with the cameras. He wasn't conducting the prayers. He was piecing stories together. Joel Osteen, at just 19 years old, had only attended Oral Roberts University for a year before leaving in the summer of 1982. He didn't feel called to the pulpit and didn't want to preach. However, he had a thought that would not go away. He declared his intention to start a television ministry from the ground up to his father, Joel Osteen, who had established Lakewood Church. Just a borrowed camera, a room, and a head full of unadulterated resolve, no training, no pattern. A few hundred households in Houston tuned into their first broadcast, which was transmitted in silence on a local cable access station that fall. No audience, no lights, and no lofty expectations. Joel, however, took each frame seriously. By 1983, Joel had been ordained through Lakewood without going to seminary or following the conventional path. Even though he wasn't performing, he was studying the backstage operations. In order to prevent future cuts from jumping, he manually edited every episode, directed every viewpoint, and even used yellowline notepads to record the clothing his father wore. Joel didn't miss a beat for the next 17 years. By the end of the 1990s, he had produced over 800 hours of polished content, having edited and directed every broadcast himself. He spent Saturday nights at his father's house choosing clothing and filming angles for Sunday rather than unwinding. Millions of people watched the Lakewood broadcast each week by 1987, and it was available in 100 countries. Joel did more than just work quietly. With a passion that few could see and even fewer understood, he was constructing something global, brick by brick, episode by episode. By the middle of the 1980s, Joel had found something concerning beneath the lights and camera cables. Lakewood was struggling to make ends meet. Donations weren't keeping up with the mounting expenses. Joel Osteen led the church with compassion but little regard for business. Joel discreetly took matters into his own hands. He approached companies in the Houston region, including grocery stores, furniture dealers, and even funeral homes, and made deals without alerting his father. In return for sponsorship funds, they would receive a shout-out on Lakewood's program. Joel tripled the revenue of the media ministry in just 2 years. In 1985, it was just over $100,000. By 1987, it had surpassed $300,000. The church was able to breathe thanks to that tranquil bustle. He immediately put it back into equipment, adding lighting and cameras to increase the show's audience. Although that wasn't ministry as his father understood it, it was effective. Joel then shocked everyone in 1987 with a move. He persuaded the Lakewood board to fund the independent television station KTBU TV 55, which is situated in Houston. This went beyond merely buying airtime. Joel constructed the station from the ground up using funds from the church. Cameras, control rooms, equipment, and the entire process. In 1980s currency, it cost more than $2 million. A huge risk for any church, much less one that is just starting out financially. However, by 1990, 10 million homes nationwide were receiving Lakewood services from that station. Elderly people find it controversial, but it works better than anyone could have predicted. By the late 1990s, Lakewood was being syndicated nationwide by KTBU. Joel had subtly transformed the church from local preaching to a media conglomerate without ever holding a pulpit position. Joel's workdays rarely lasted less than 12 hours during the 1990s. He served as the director, editor, quality inspector, and lighting specialist. Every sound, shadow, and perspective had significance. He insisted on award-level criteria. He believed that Lakewood broadcasts needed to have an atmosphere reminiscent of the Oscars or Monday Night Football. He frequently got into arguments with employees who didn't meet his expectations. Cameramen needed to be perfect. The sound engineers were unable to miss a beat. He refused to preach even now. He let his father handle that. Joel liked the editing bay, the wires, and the shadows. Then January 1999 arrived. Joel's world fell apart a few days after he reluctantly delivered his first sermon. On January 23, his father, Joel Osteen, unexpectedly passed away from a heart attack. He was 77. Joel had only taken the stage once. Only 6 days have passed since that particular sermon. He had refused to preach for years. There was now no one else, no strategy, and no backup. Thousands of people turned out to observe this quiet man attempt to lead while still in mourning. A preacher was not the only thing the throng needed. Someone was required to keep everything together. He didn't dive right in. Joel actually gave his siblings the job opportunity first. No one was accepted. His wife, Victoria, silently prodded him forward despite his hesitancy. Joel was formally appointed as Lakewood Church's senior pastor on October 3, 1999. It was more than simply a pulpit that he inherited. The institution, which cost $90 million annually, had aging facilities, international activities, and internal uncertainty. Donations fell by 20% in a matter of months. The church started to tremble. Joel had to contribute his own funds in order to maintain stability. There was simply pressure, anxiety, and the silent weight of something too huge to ignore. No cheers, no early triumph. He cut the sermons to 20 minutes because he recognized that things needed to change quickly. He changed Sunday services to something more lively and approachable by using modern music. The weekly attendance increased from 6,000 to over 10,000 in just 1 year. Longtime members were taken aback. Joel did more than simply update the information, he made the entire experience lighter and more seamless while maintaining a sense of hope. He continued to oversee the media operation at the same time, directing, filming, and transmitting. The Joel Osteen television program debuted in October 1999. 2 million people were watching within a few months. His approach was straightforward, amiable, and consisted of only a camera, a grin, and a message about rising again, no fire or brimstone. Not everyone was in favor of him. The change was opposed by the older employees who had supported John's customs. The church experienced a serious financial difficulty by the middle of 1999. The entire organization was stressed by the 20% decline in tithes. To keep the lights on, Joel had to sell off personal belongings. Hope alone is insufficient to sustain a $90 million budget. He reduced spending, made difficult decisions, launched last-minute fundraising efforts, and used every media gimmick at his disposal. The ship is steadily moving. Every choice he made at the church office was now guided by the same unwavering focus he had in the editing room. He persisted. A few thousand individuals were still attending Lakewood Church every week in 1999. However, the numbers not only increased but also skyrocketed after Joel Osteen took over as commander. Weekly attendance reached 15,000 by 2005. They were no longer able to fit in the old building. Thus, the church took a risk. They targeted the Compact Center, a stadium that used to reverberate with the Houston Rockets' thunderous cheers. Following protracted negotiations and political back and forth, Lakewood agreed to a 30-year lease in exchange for an upfront payment of $1.8 million. It cost around $100 million to transform that enormous area into a place of worship. The 16,500-seat arena was converted into an opulent haven with the addition of luxury seating and indoor waterfalls. Lakewood had grown to be the biggest church in the U.S. by the time they relocated in July 2005, raising the standard for what a megachurch could look like. The price was high. They were forced to borrow $100 million from Bank of America. Furthermore, that bank wasn't even their first pick. They had been rejected by many. But after nearly 20 years, an uncommon occurrence occurred. Lakewood paid back the whole $4.4 million in October 2021. They said the cash only went to pay people, not to make money for themselves. There was a clear message, but the argument didn't end. It never really did. In the same year, 2021, rumors became news stories. The IRS had been quietly following prosperity preachers for years, and Joel Osteen was very close to the top of the list. An investigation that went back to 2007 showed that $89 million in media income came from close connections. It wasn't illegal, but it was hard to understand. It wasn't just critics who didn't like Joel's message that wealth is divine favor anymore. It was getting the attention of the law. Most churches were not inspected very often. Joel's wasn't like most. It was huge, aired on TV, and full of profits. It was known as treason. They said it was consumerism dressed up as religion. Joel didn't move. He didn't change the message. Be kind and helpful. Stay true to God. Look for gifts. Then February 11, 2024 came along. A woman with an AR-15 walked into Lakewood Church in the middle of a Spanish service and started shooting. She was 36 years old and her name was Genesee Yvonne Moreno. A 57-year-old guy and a 7-year-old boy were both hit and seriously hurt. Moreno did it by himself and had a past of mental health problems. Police body cams caught the chaos. The event became national news in minutes. Joel Osteen looked very sad. He taught people to forgive. He asked people to pray for him. But soon after, security questions came up. Lakewood had the money. What else could they have done? In response, the church spent $500,000 to make security better. But the pain stayed. A place meant to heal turned into a crime scene. The crowd was sad. The questions kept coming up. It was around the same time that a story spread. That Joel Osteen had lost $60 million in the pandemic was said to be true. It was a quick story that wasn't true. The numbers were run by financial experts. His book sales weren't down. He always got paid to talk. In fact, he was worth $110 million by 2025. Over 10 million copies of his books have been sold around the world. It was downloaded over 6 million times a year. The company didn't pay him a salary. He made his money from live shows, television rights, and book deals. The story about the $60 million loss was just hype. Joel's money was still the same. It got bigger. Joel Osteen still stood at the front of Lakewood Church at age 62 and preached to more than 50,000 people every week. When he first took over after his father died in 1999, there were only 6,000 people there. Now, it was the biggest single-site church service in the U.S., and maybe even the world. Joel Osteen, Overflow with Hope, the show he did every week on TV, touched 200 million homes in 100 countries. He had a digital effect now. Get books, podcasts, and live streams. His voice was heard all over the world, but even powers have turning points. Church paid back its $100 million loan to Bank of America for renovations in 2024. Joel told them with tears in his eyes. The church had no debts. For 20 years, they worked on it, even when other banks turned them down. They had spent hundreds of millions of dollars on reaching people around the world and never missed a payment. Some people said it was a lie. They said the church had too much debt to pay off. But that moment showed that wasn't true. Their building was theirs. They closed the books. Joel just stood there and smiled. Not just because of how much money they gave, but also because of what it meant to the donors.